Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced with another video on programming in Ruby. And as generally in any language, the next step, now that we understand functions and variables and collections and operators and all that fun stuff, the next step is understanding classes and objects. So what is this whole classes and objects thing? Well, the idea is that it's called object-oriented programming. What this means is that you look at your problem, you look at the thing you're trying to fix or do, and say, are there objects? A video game is always the easiest way to imagine this. So imagine I'm making a video game dog collector where you're collecting dogs. Well, there's going to be an object called dog that can do certain things. Okay, and basically I want to define it in my program in a way where I can create as many dogs as I want. I don't want to have to redefine what a barking means every time I make a new dog, what fur means, all these different details. Okay, so what you're doing is the idea is to create a template for how an object behaves that you can create over and over again. Okay, and again, the thing you always have to keep in mind when you're programming is that oftentimes you're programming in teams. So you may have one team that's designing all these sort of functions and classes that another team then uses to execute the core, program logic. You're not always necessarily doing both, creating a bunch of functions and classes and then creating another program. So you always have to think about, like, how can I make this easier for other people? How can I make tools that other people can use? So if I were sitting there creating the dog object for this game, I want to create a class. So think of class as the noun. Okay, so it's a dog is a thing, a noun. Now a dog can do certain things. It can verb. Okay, these are going to be called methods of the class or functions of the class. And I can describe the noun. I can describe the dog using adjectives. These are going to be the properties of the class. So essentially, when you define a class, you're defining a noun that has certain adjectives and verbs. So in this case, I'm going to create a class called dog. Okay, class called dog, and generally convention is to capitalize classes. So class dog. Okay, and then as usual, like anything else, everything about this class is going to be sandwiched between that class declaration and the word end because it's Ruby, and that's how Ruby works. Now, typically, in most programming languages, you have what's called a constructor function. Generally, it's a function with the same name as the class, so it would be called dog. And what this does is that it's a function that runs when the class is created. So when I create a new dog, this function is going to run. Okay, now in Ruby, they made this a little bit more explicit, which is not a bad thing. I think the explicitness of the Ruby language in a lot of areas where it's not necessarily as clear in other programming languages is nice. So in this case, what they have is a initialize function. So you're defining a function that calls initialize. Okay, and you can't do anything else other than use this. Like, you'll never call the initialize function. You'll never be like, oh, I'm going to initialize. No, it's going to happen when you create the dog, which I'll show you in a moment. Okay, so initialize, and then I can name any parameters that I want to take in. So we'll say we want to take in the dog's name and age, and that's good for now. Okay, so then that will have its own end block. Again, indenting so that way it's easier to tell what's what. So in this case, all this does is we're going to make a variable, and every instance of a class has its own data. So basically, every dog is going to have its own name and age. So these are what's referred to as instance variables. Now, in most languages, when you're defining the class, you'll refer to them as saying like this dot variable name. Here, you use the @ symbol. So technically, the dog's name, the variable would be referred to as @name. So I'm saying, hey, the dog's name is going to equal name, the name parameter that we pass through. Okay, the dog's age is going to equal the age parameter that you pass through. Cool, that's neat. Okay, and then I can also define other methods or functions of the dog. So for example, let's say the dog barks. So def bark. Okay, we're going to take no parameters. So again, it's Ruby, so I don't have to worry about an empty parentheses. And it just barks, puts woof. Okay, And then that's it for that function, so end, and then the class ends. Let me just put another space here just to make it look nice and cleaner. Okay, so you can see I declared class dog, I created its constructor function, and I gave it a method called bark. Now if I want to create a new dog, so we create a new dog called Sparky, we would say Sparky equals a dog that is new. And since the constructor function, the initialize function, takes in two parameters, I'll give it two parameters. Sparky, a string called Sparky, because that's the name I want to give the dog, because the first parameter is the name. And the second parameter is the age. So we'll say the age is 3. It's a 3-year-old dog. So now what I can do is I can be like puts, and let's say I want to see what Sparky's name is, I can put Sparky dot name, and that should spark the name, print out the name of Sparky. But then after I checked his name, he barked. So Sparky dot bark. Okay, so let's see how that runs. Underline method name for dog. Let's see here. Interesting. It seems that you can't just access the variables. So I can access bark that way. I can't access. So you have to create setter and getter functions. Now, what a setter and getter function is the idea is that you create a special function for getting variables in a class. Because in a lot of other languages, what they'll do is that they'll make you can make the variables or properties, in this case name and age, private or public. Public meaning you can just access it from within the function, or I mean outside the class or inside the class. In this case, it seems like they're all private, which means I can't just call the variable from out here. So what if I wanted to print Sparky's name? How would I do that? Well, I'm going to have to create a function inside the class that allows me to go out there and get that variable. So we'll call this def name getter, and all this does is return add name. Okay, which I can see probably why they did that, looking at the naming convention of properties. So def age getter return add age. There, and I mean that's a pretty simple function. It just basically gets you the age or function. Okay, first let's just make sure that bark works fine. Woof. Yep, Sparky barks. And see, we know Sparky exists because I didn't say dog should bark. I said Sparky should bark, and Sparky barked. Okay, so now I want to get Sparky's age. So now we'll do puts Sparky dot name getter. Woof, Sparky, and it gives me his name because that function returns his name. So basically, you just got to assume that you have to create setter and getter. Now, a setter would be one to change the function, although I think you can change it from outside. But probably not a bad idea to create a setter function too. And the benefit of setter and getter functions is it allows you to control how to set and get, because there might be you might want a certain variable to be based on a certain formula. So you want people to not set it by just setting an arbitrary number, but by putting in an input that then gets crunched to figure out what it is. So there's reasons why you may want to control that, because again, you may know how it works, you may know what you want, but the person who may end up using this class in their program may not. So you want to control that whole path. But what if I wanted to create something from a dog? Like I wanted to create like a class for a particular breed of dog. Okay. What I would do is I would do class dog. Okay, and we'll call this a terrier. Actually, it should be this way. Terrier. I'm going to create a new class called terrier that inherits from dog. This is called inheritance, which means that basically this terrier is just a copy of dog. It has everything that dog has. Works exactly the same way, except I can put extra stuff in there if I want. And I should also be able to override the functions. What it means to override a function is I create a new class, and if I define a function with the same name, so in this case def bark, well, not capitalized, bark. I can, autocorrect, bark. I can then have it do something different. So puts rough end. Okay, so basically I created this new class that inherits from the class dog. So now if I say Sparky is a terrier, so if I say, hey, he's a new terrier, not a new dog, okay, this all should still work the same, except now when he barks, instead of saying woof, since he's a terrier, it's going to call the terrier version of the bark function. But since there's no new version of the other functions, it'll call the old versions of the functions from the dog class. Rough, Sparky, see? So basically this allows you, if you need to create new classes that are slightly different, you don't need to retype the whole thing, you just inherit, you can create like a class that has the stuff that's going to be pretty much in common with everything, and then create inherited classes that just have the minor differences, which reduces the amount of total code you'll have to type, but still have the diverse classes that you need. So this is part of what you want to think about when you're doing object-oriented programming. Like, what's an object? What are the properties and functions of that object? But also sort of, can I create a prototype object that'll allow me to create many of the objects that I'm going to be needing to create? And this allows you to kind of create all the tools you need, so that when you actually get to the core programming logic, life's a lot easier, because everything you need is kind of built in. If you ever use something like a game engine, or you played like a video game, basically you'll see like sometimes enemies get generated. The reason is because there's a class that represents your villain, and it has a constructor function. So every time that basically they create a new villain, there's already all these things already set in place to create it, and it was probably a lot easier than it looked because they built those core classes instead of literally having to create a program that goes through this entire script each time. So smart, deliberate programming, really thinking through what your code represents, makes life a lot easier when you're coding, and also allows you to type much more explicit code that's going to be easier to read. Okay, and then again, also just making good use of spacing and indentation also makes it easier to read. Okay, so make sure you indent stuff. Okay, so notice I can tell that all this is on the same level, and then all this is within those things, and indentation is your friend. So my name's Alex Merced. Now that you've seen these videos on Ruby, you know the core concepts as far as the syntax in the core programming concepts in Ruby. Now it's up to you going forward to go research all the different methods for like arrays, to practice creating classes, and learning some frameworks like maybe like a Ruby on Rails or Hanami or Sinatra, and take your Ruby skills to the next level. But now you have that core, you have the conceptual ideas that allow you to go forward with your programming skills. So congrats, cadet, you've graduated onto the next journey.